Welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. We have multiple people here today. I'm so excited to introduce to you. I'm Rachel Marshall with my regular co-host, Bruce Wayner. Hi, Bruce.
Good afternoon. I guess I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but good afternoon for me. This is always exciting when we have guests, and when we have guests that are so much aligned with our mindset, it even makes it better. So I'm really looking forward to all the value that Mitzi can bring our listeners today.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and introduce my husband, Lucas, as well. And then I'm going to bring Mitzi into the show. So Lucas, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Well, Mitzi, I am going to give a formal introduction, but first, thank you so much for being willing to join us here on the Money Advantage. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, I love being on this show, and it's certainly a topic that's of great interest.
Wonderful. Well, if anyone who is listening, if you are familiar with Mitzi Perdue, you are in a rare treat. I want to share with you a little bit about her background in case you're not familiar, because she is somebody that you really need to know about. So today we're talking about how to build strong families and strong family culture. And this is something that Mitzi has been working on for a very long time, more than her lifespan. So let me tell you how and why. Now, she shares the wisdom of successful multi-generational families as she's connecting two business titan families. So she can tell you more, but she is the daughter of one business titan, and her father founded the Sheraton hotel chain, and she's the widow of another, and that is her late husband, the poultry magnate. I think I'm saying magnate correctly. Frank Perdue. So she's also a businesswoman in her own right, and she started a family wine grape business, which is now one of the larger suppliers of wine grapes in California. Now, Mitzi likes nothing better than to share insider tips for building powerful and effective family culture. Her family of origin, the one that started Sheraton Hotels, began with the Henderson Estate Company in 1840, and her Perdue family started in 1920 in the poultry business. And so if you add up those two families, there is 276 years, not just of family business, but of staying close as a family. And that is profoundly beautiful. So these two families have that combined tradition of staying close as a family, keeping business in the family, and really flourishing. So Mitzi is happy to share actionable advice on how they did it. And Mitzi, you also have an amazing background. You have a degree from Harvard, as well as from George Washington University. You're a former rice grower and wine grape grower in California. You're the past president of the 35,000 member American Agro Women. And in addition, you were one of the U.S. delegates to the UN Conference on Women in Nairobi, and you're a former commissioner of the U.S. National Commission on Libraries and Information Science. And I also know that you are an anti-trafficking advocate. So much to talk about here. I'm sure we could be here for quite a long time, but let's really dig in today to this idea of how do I create a family culture, not by accident, because it's not going to become what you hope for it to be, but how do you intentionally craft and create a family culture that has traditions that solidify and strengthen and really glue together those relationships over the generations. So Mitzi, I would love to hear you tell from your own perspective just a little bit of the backstory of what has led you to helping other people create family traditions and culture.
Oh, super. Nobody's asked me the backstory before, but I'll share it with you. And the backstory of how I got into writing and talking about how to keep family businesses close. Because we have a saying in the Perdue family, happy business. You need to really address both. But the backstory of how I got into it, well, I lived in New York for 5 years, and we're talking probably 10 years ago. But back then, I belonged to a group called the Famous Last Names Club. And they all had names that you just would know. But one of the conditions of belonging to the club is you never mentioned the names. Nevertheless, I won't tell you the names, but I will tell you about a lunch that got me started forevermore in being fascinated on what makes a high-functioning family. And at this lunch, people who every one of them, you've heard their names. And if you're guessing names, yeah, that was probably in it. I think there were 16 people there. And at this lunch, the topic for the day was, how well do you get along with your siblings?
Mm.
And we went around the table, and I happened by accident to be at the head of the table, so it started to my right. And we went around the table talking about how people got along with their siblings. And it was just one catastrophe story after another. You know, one of them, it was a woman, told me how her two brothers were freezing her out of the family business by not letting her know when meetings took place.
Mm.
Another one, which was worse, there were 4 family members, and they were, it's hard to believe, but I did hear it. They were all suing each other.
Mm.
Their inheritance was going into legal fees. Or another case, I think there were 3 members, and one of them had a substance abuse problem. And it wasn't, it was just bad enough to muck everything up, but not enough to institutionalize him.
Mm.
And he wasn't just not pulling his weight, he was really harming the company. And as we went around the table, actually everybody had some catastrophe story. One said that she was so mad at her brother that if he died, she would jump on his grave with joy.
Mm.
And that's telling me that there are a lot of very famous families that haven't figured out the basic of how to get along.
Mm.
And I started thinking, this was what I'm describing. It was a somewhat awkward moment for me, because after they had gone around the table, and finally it's ending up with me, and I'm supposed to tell everybody, hey, we're all roses and sunshine. I wasn't fitting in. So I didn't exactly say anything. I just sort of said one mumble, and the conversation moved on. But as I left that meeting, I'm thinking, the 2 families that I'm part of, they're the biggest source of joy in my life.
Mm.
What do we do that not everybody else does? And what enabled us to last so long? Because the statistics on families lasting, every generation, only about 1/3 of family businesses make it to the next generation. And by the time you're at 100 years, only 1 in 1,000 makes it that long. And I've spent the rest of my life, I think I can pinpoint when this happened. It was 14 years ago. I spent the next 14 years reading everything I could, interviewing people, even writing blog posts. I write for Wealth Management and Trust and Estates Management, and also the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents. And I write on trafficking for Psychology Today, but even that gets into family stuff. And I'm monologuing too long. But
I love that story. And, Mitzi, you as an entrepreneur are familiar with that idea of recognize a problem, provide a solution. And that's what I'm hearing that you did. You didn't say, oh no, I guess it's not solvable, or, oh no, I guess I just have some unique gene or rare set of circumstances that allows me to flourish and my family to do well that no one else can have. You said, there's got to be a way to provide a solution that people desperately want and need. And yet somehow it's getting missed in prioritizing all of the other things. And, I think that's one of the things that attracted me to you so much when we first heard you speak, and you were talking about how to have families stay strong. It doesn't really matter if you have tremendous generational wealth and you have billions of dollars flowing.
It's probably a handicap unless you put a lot of thought and care and effort into it.
Yes. And if you don't have the strong culture and you don't have the strong relationships, what do you have then to do well with financial resources that are passed down? And so we look at the reason that, or maybe not the reason, but the need for families that are passing wealth to create in the next generation that stewardship and the accountability and the relationships and the character to be able to do those things well, so that financial resources and a financial inheritance is like kindling to a fire. They already know how to build the fire. They know how to handle it with responsibility, and they know how to do things well. And so then you can give this additional gift that just allows their impact and their legacy to go further. But Mitzi, you have done so much work. One of your books here is How to Make Your Family Business Last. You also have How to Communicate Values to Children so They'll Love It, and How to Make Your Family Connected. So 3 of your books. I know you have another one coming out as well. Let's dig into family culture. So what is different about families that last for generations?
Okay, I'm going to jump in with something that every family can use, whether they're a business family or not. And this comes from research that I did. It's not personal research where I found the information. But there is a department of Emory University. It's called the Family Narratives Laboratory. And if anybody's feeling like taking notes, this is a note to take. Remember the name Robin Fivish, Emory University Family Narratives Laboratory. And she and her whole department, as far as I can tell, spend almost full time studying what makes a family high functioning. And there is an answer, and I'm going to share it with you. But first, let me define high functioning. High functioning means you enjoy being together. You probably have if you're high functioning, you probably have above average mental health, physical health. Kids stay in school and finish school. If it's their temperament, they go on to college. They form good marriages. They don't get pregnant before it's time to be pregnant. I mean, you don't find teenage pregnancies, unwanted ones. They don't get in trouble with the law. They're less subject to obesity. They're less subject to substance abuse. That's high functioning. That's what we're aiming for. And we could probably add more to the list, but we only have an hour. So let me go on. How do you get there? And this is what the Family Narratives Laboratory studies. What does it take to be a high functioning family? And possibly this might be the most useful thing that I'll say today. I mean, I hope I say other things that are worthwhile, but this is the biggie. Families that spend time with each other and know their family stories are the ones that are highest functioning. And they've actually done studies where the way you know your family stories is you've spent time together. And imagine kind of like a graph. And here at one end is low functioning. That also happens to be ones who spend rather little time together. Then I'm taking this graph up as far as I can to the other side and as high as I can. This is high functioning. And there's an almost perfect correlation with how many meals you have together in the course of a week. The more meals, the higher functioning. And why is that? Well, it gets back to why the family stories are important. Because stories, I don't know if you've gotten fascinated as I have by why stories are important, but they're like little computer programs inside your head, telling you how to think about things, telling you how to respond to things, telling you how to act. And the general culture of this country and probably the world isn't terribly strengthening for family bonds. I mean, it's like a centrifugal force. So how do you counteract that? I mean, you can listen to the stories of the general culture, which I think is kind of horrifying, some of the things that they glorify or the ugliest music that talks about rape and whatnot. You can let your kids have that be the dominant force in their lives, or instead, you can have 5 or more meals together in the course of a week, and you can talk about you don't have to have an agenda. I will talk about this, this, and this, but in the course of being together, the kids are probably going to learn about like times that you struggled, times maybe that you were ill, maybe bankruptcies, or maybe great big triumphs. But along the way, you are absorbing the culture that this is a great family, that we're proud of each other, that we like each other, that we want to make each other proud. So spending time together, I think, is the number one thing. And allow me to jump to the number two, because that is a good segue to
Yes.
what I think has made both the Hendersons and the Perdues last. And this, again, I'm not sure it's open to everybody, but consider it. The Hendersons, I told you that we started in 1840. By the time the family was 50 years old, and that I guess means 1890, in 1890, they decided, hey, we really do like each other. We're a great group, but would like those who come after us to experience the same joy of having almost like a tribe of people who care about you and a safety net and a source of values. Let's make sure it doesn't end when we go. And they got together. I think there were like 12 Hendersons at this point, and they pooled money. They were a real estate company, so they could do this. They pooled enough money to endow in perpetuity the Henderson Estate Company, the purpose of which is to fund, initially it was to fund the Henderson Estate dinner every year. And so there was enough money to have just a rip-roaring, great, fantastic dinner. Just pull out all the stops, have a great time, where family members would know they were going to get together. And it was, I can tell you as a child growing up, it was just so exciting when you were old enough, like 12, to attend the family dinner. And there might be 80 or so people there. Well, today in 2022, it's turned into the Henderson Family Weekend. And I talk with family members who say, yeah, this is one of the high points of their life, getting together with a whole group of people who care about them, who, if they're in trouble, are going to look out for them or have their back or celebrate when things have gone right. And so it could be an endowed meal once a year. That took us for, I don't know, probably 80 years. But it did grow into the Henderson Family Weekend. So if you're the head of a family and you want it to continue beyond your passing, endow a vacation or a dinner or a weekend, and just put enough money in to make a great big event. And I will tell you what's going to happen if you don't. You ready?
Sure.
Okay, if you don't, here's what happens almost every time. I mean, it is the pattern. You have a strong, thriving family business. You really care about each other. It's going along well. And then the matriarch or patriarch or both go to their great reward. And for the next year, you get together at Thanksgiving, you get together at the holidays, you reminisce. 2 or 3 years after that, well, maybe you've kind of gone your separate ways on Thanksgivings. Maybe Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you're not spending together. By 5 years, you'll go to a family wedding. By 10 years, you don't even know your cousins and the whole family's gone poof. And that is what happens if you don't have some mechanism for staying together.
And this is fascinating because I've heard the research as well about having family dinner together. And thankfully, I was lucky enough to have family dinner with my family growing up. Lucas had the same with his family. And that's just become a culture that we have created as almost an expectation that this is just how you do things. And it's amazing how much power there is in that uniting and coming together on a regular basis with your family unit. I mean, that's not going to be grandparents and aunts and uncles and everyone who lives outside of the four walls of your home, but being able to have that tight-knit group, that's extremely important. And just being able to have, I was talking to another friend who said quantity time, not just quality time, but quantity time.
It's quantity.
Yes. So
because if you're in
people's lives.
Yeah, if you're embedding the culture, just hearing it once doesn't make any difference at all. It's got to be like, well, I have a definition of culture, and I made this up. I think it's fairly accurate, but it is mine. Other people can disagree. But for me, culture is the way we do things. And it's kind of automatic. It's just the way we do things. And that doesn't get drummed into the little heads with just saying it once. No, they copy it, they emulate it. And that takes time. And by the way, I have something somewhat controversial to say, but I've seen it work out in both my family of origin and the family I married into. And here's the somewhat controversial thing. I'm against boarding school. None of the Hendersons sent family members to boarding school. None of the Perdues have sent family members to boarding school. And, I could certainly afford to have sent my 2 kids to boarding school. I didn't even seriously consider it because I didn't want somebody else's values to be drummed into their little heads. In fact, I didn't even, I'm a Sheraton heiress. I could have afforded nannies. I didn't want some other woman's values to be instilled in my kids. And values, by the way, I do think are one of the big keys to what makes a business family last, or any family. And, among the things that they've simply got to learn from the youngest age is you can't always be right.
So Mitzi, this is a great transition to what I've been thinking about the whole time. I can understand when you're starting the family business and you already have these values and systems in place. And I was just wondering if the research isn't skewed by the fact that, you're going to have some families that do the family meals and share the family values. And of course, then they stay together. And then you have other ones that don't. But is there any research that shows that the ones that haven't performed, like whatever the good group is, that they then implement these types of simple things like meals, weekends, so on and so forth? Or I guess my question is it the chicken coming before the egg or the egg coming before the chicken? And the reason I bring it up is because I think it's important to look at that, because there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, yeah, you instill these in their little kids' hearts, but my kids are already matured and I don't know if I can influence them anymore. And how do you go about that?
All right, that's such an important point, because everything that I've ever read about inculcating the culture is get them while they're young.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I also have a belief it's never too early and it's never too late. And by the way, can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
At somewhere like 3 or 4 minutes from now, I'm going to get a phone call that I have to tell the person I can't take it now, but he's going to be terribly insulted if I don't just say, call me later. Are we okay with that?
That is quite all right. I can mute you at that time too. Just if you want to hold up your finger, then I can mute. We won't even hear your conversation.
Oh, don't you want to hear the stuff I have to say? Peek into Mitzi's secret life. No, I will do my very best to make it not longer than 20 seconds, but
no problem.
It happens.
No problem. That's quite all right. You just give me, just hold up your finger when you're ready. So,
all right. And I want to get back to, and talking or responding to Bruce. Yeah. I mean, you really would like to get them while they're young, but I don't know, some military guy said, you go into battle with the army you've got. So you deal with what you've got, and it's not too late, because I'll tell you, since I got into this, you wouldn't believe how many families I've talked with, including ones which, they're almost at daggers drawn towards each other. But in almost every case, almost every case, when it's not going well, the pain is acute. And so their pain is, alas, a great motivator. Mm-hmm. And if people are just suffering, because that when we started out a few minutes ago, at the beginning of the show, and I mentioned the famous Last Names Club, a detail that I left out was people kept mentioning that the pain of a badly functioning family permeated every hour of every day. Mm. So if you can tell them ways to get around this, I mean, it's one of the most important things that you can do for them. And so if you can tell them, hey, yeah, there's hope. Other families have been just as dysfunctional as yours, and they've come out the other side. Mm-hmm. However, a book or a conversation isn't going to do it for them. At that point, I think they need professional help, but there's a whole ecosystem of family advisors. And if somebody is in that state where they're experiencing pain because they're at each other's throats, they're jealous, the new wife didn't fit in and everybody else hates her. Oh my gosh, that makes me suddenly think of the British royal family. You want a dysfunctional family? Exhibit A, except that I know ones that are so much worse. A quick example, this is a family I talked with in Hong Kong. I wish I hadn't told you what country it was, but here's the story. The two brothers married, their wives couldn't stand each other. They had been doing some somewhat shady financial things. The wife of one of them told the equivalent of IRS of Hong Kong what was going on. The guy ended up in jail. When he came out of jail, he killed his brother. Now that's a dysfunctional family.
Oh, that's terrifying.
And when you laugh not because something's funny, but because you recognize it. Mm-hmm. Are you aware, by the way, that probably half of laughter is from recognition and not from it's funny?
Oh,
yeah. You recognize it in yourself or in other.
Well, in this case, you recognize the horror of it.
Or yes. That's what I mean. Yourself or that you've seen it before, unfortunately.
Wow, that is fascinating. So, Mitzi, you're talking about there is hope for the family that is currently dysfunctional and decides that we want a different path. We want a different trajectory. And so I think from here, I know you have a call coming in, but as we pick up the conversation, what I'd like to then ask you is, can we dig into some of the things that you have seen work in functional families that anyone who desires to create a healthy, stronger family culture than they currently have today, whether it was strong coming from past generations or whether it was not, whether there's currently disharmony and discord or whether there's strength, what can families do practically to start putting things in place to handle things like celebrations, or how do you handle quarrels, or what about the value of philanthropy? So these are some things that we'd like to dig into as soon as you are ready.
Okay, since I don't know that this person is going to call exactly on time, what if I just plunge in and start to answer? But, it really depends on how dysfunctional they are. The family where the brother killed the brother after putting him in jail, I don't see a whole lot of hope in that. Mm-hmm. But let me share one preventive thing. I bet I've talked with hundreds of family counselors, and I haven't had anybody, maybe even 1,000, because I give talks publicly. I've yet to hear a family counselor disagree with what I'm about to say, which is, if you have a family quarrel, the one thing that you can't do is take it public. You don't want to read about it in the papers. You don't want to have you don't want lawsuits at all, because those are two things that by the time you get to that point, it's pretty close to impossible to put it back together again. And the family counselors that I've talked about this with, they say that they won't take clients who, if it's gotten to the point where it's out in the public or where lawyers have been retained. So I'll tell you how the Hendersons and the Perdues have both followed this. And this is something that I recommend to every family that exists. The Hendersons and the Perdues, we're both fine with quarrels. With the Hendersons, we particularly, we say, if you've got a beef, get it out. And if you need to yell or scream. And with the Perdues, I don't think it would even be frowned on if you had to throw something. You have to be heard, and we don't want you to, like what we call gunny sack it. We don't want you to store it up. Instead, what we'd like is in the Hendersons, we call it, we don't wash our dirty linen in public. you can quarrel and you can fight and you can just get it out. And however strongly you feel, you can let everybody else know, yeah, this is how strongly I feel about it. But you don't go public. You don't wash your dirty linen in public. And I was taught that I think I might have still been in a high chair when I learned that. The Perdues independently, I mean, long before I came on the scene, came up with the same approach, which is, it's called the covenant. And the covenant is the same thing. You can have just the deepest disagreements, but the covenant is you solve it within the family. And if that means, I'm being hypothetical here, addressing other people, but if your problem is so severe that you're just not making progress, you're stuck, you're starting to hate each other, at that point, or preferably long before, call in an outside mediator or a family counselor, maybe even a family psychiatrist. Get outside help and do it as soon as possible, because the longer it festers, the harder it is to cure. Mm-hmm. But I said that having meals together was my best piece of advice. I'm not sure it's the best piece of advice, because I think it's almost equally important. Don't wash your dirty linen in public. Have a covenant. And it's in both families, it's just so against the rules to suffer in silence. No, if something is bothering you, and it's a real world, people are going to be bothered by things. Get it out, deal with it, discuss it. And ideally, if the family is old enough and large enough, I think you should start thinking of this third generation. By third generation, it ought to be in place. You ought to have the equivalent of a constitution. I mean, yes. You can call it, I don't care what you call it, but a way by which you resolve disputes. And like, I'll share with you how the Perdues do it. We have a whole constellation of a hierarchy of issues where, like if it's the family vacation, everybody gets to vote and it's just the majority. On the other hand, if it has something to do with a stock distribution or the governance of the company, it might take a 2/3 majority. And for some of the really serious stuff, it might only be bloodline. So, but it's understood ahead of time what the rules of the game are. And maybe you didn't get your way, but at least there was a process by which you were heard and a vote was taken. That's how it works in the Perdue family. And by the way, that's awfully close to how it works in the United States. We have, it's a rules-based society where in theory, there are ways of handling disagreements. The Hendersons have a somewhat different approach. And I think we're more like the British approach. The British don't have a written constitution. The Hendersons don't have a written constitution. But the way the Brits do it is they have, I'm not sure a Brit would express it this way, but the way it looks to me is they kind of operate on precedent. This is what worked in the past. This is what we're going to pay a lot of attention to. And with the Hendersons, we rarely vote on anything. We just discuss and discuss and discuss. And does this fit who we are or does it not? And somehow we coalesce.
And in order to do that, it sounds like you have to know who you are. And so you mentioned earlier having values, which I think is a tremendously important part of any family culture, setting up what is your value system, what is meaningful to you as a family. Where do you think the values fit in this bigger picture of having a strong family and being able to resolve disputes and being able to set up a constitution? Where does that fit for you?
I think it's the most important thing there is. And, among the values that I would teach kids just from the youngest age, well, one of the first is you can't always be right. Just accept that sometimes it's not going to go your way. And they've got to learn that so early, because by the time you're, in your 20s, your 30s, and you start thinking, if I think it should be this way, well, it should be this way. Nope, world doesn't work that way, or certainly the family doesn't work that way. Okay, so to me, number one is you can't always be right. Number two, stewardship. that you're part of something bigger than yourself, and your goal isn't to go and spend the money. Your goal is to stewardship in its largest sense. I mean, you care about the environment, care about the employees, care about those who come after you. You are a steward. And this is another thing that I'm really proud of, that two families that evolved separately. And, I'm kind of a link between them because I married into one. But it's kind of amazing to me how much they both came up with, like, the stewardship part. In the Hendersons, I think it would be really looked down on to get your identity by spending. I mean, I don't know of any Henderson who gets his or her identity. Oh, and this is controversial, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes.
No, this is so good. Go ahead.
Actually, that's not the call. Actually, the good news is I'd sent a message to my friend saying, hey, the time that you suggested isn't going to work. And he never answered, so I was afraid I'd be interrupted, but I think he must have gotten it.
Okay.
So we're good.
Okay,
Yay.
no problem. No problem.
Okay, but back to what I was going to say, that is, I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but I don't know a single Henderson or any Perdue who would get his or her identity by having to buy designer clothes. I mean, that would be, I think, kind of looked down on. That would be, I mean, does a good steward spend $4,000 on a dress? Actually, it would be okay if I don't know, if you're on the red carpet or something, but for day-to-day life, unless it's an amazing occasion, you don't have to spend money on designer clothes.
Well, I think what's interesting about that piece, if I may comment for a second, that there's this idea, I'm sure you've heard the rags to rags in 3 generations, or shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, where the challenge that happens is that one generation creates the wealth, the second generation lives in the lifestyle of using the resources, and by the third generation, they're accustomed to a different kind of lifestyle. They spend and not deploy in assets, but they use up the resources trying to maintain a lifestyle, but being divorced or separated from the work ethic that created the wealth, in the financial wealth in the first place. And what you're talking about is the absolute key to not having wealth disperse in that way, because what you're saying is you next person, you next in line in this generation, in this family, are equally responsible to contribute to the family and be a producer, not just a consumer of resources. You're not seen as to be able to just use up what is there or live a certain lifestyle, but you're saying, how do you contribute? How do you produce? How do you steward these resources in a way that wealth is going through you, not just to you? And I think that's a key distinction, that no wealth is meant to be just received and coming to me. It's meant to go through me. How can I use it to bless the next generation? How can I use it to make a bigger impact in the world? But certainly anyone who just thinks of themselves as a reservoir and a stopping spot for money is not going to see it last very long.
And I can tell you, in both families, you don't win any points by being lavished with money. No, I'll share a way that, like in the Perdue family, that we try to inculcate the idea that being frugal is a virtue. And by the way, that was really easy with the Hendersons, because New Englanders just plain tend to be frugal. But with the Perdues, let's see if it's within reach. It's not. I have a newsletter for the grown-ups, but I also have a newsletter for the kids. And each newsletter is, let me see if it's within reach. Yeah.
You can grab it if you'd like.
Okay. It's just out of reach.
Go ahead. I'd love to hear about this.
Monologue while I grab it.
Okay. It's amazing so Mitzi's going to share something really, really unique that we heard about through her previous talk and also through her books, but this idea of being able to communicate values and things that matter through a newsletter that shares family news and keeps the family together. Mitzi, I can't wait for you to share this. I have heard you share about the newsletter before, and specifically the one for the children as well, that most people wouldn't necessarily think of. So please do share as much as possible about this. This is beautiful.
I'm having the time of my life. You're asking me all the questions I want to be asked.
Great.
All right, what I'm holding up, you're looking at a treasure chest. I had 500 of these made, and somewhere around 4 times a year, at least it's not happening right now because the kids aren't the right age. But when they're kids between 4 and 12, I send out a newsletter, and the newsletter, the purpose of it is to inculcate values. And I'll share with you how like the value of being frugal, because we simply are frugal. We hate waste. So I tell the story of great-grandmother Mommy Dew. Mommy Dew was a great cook, and at Thanksgiving she'd always make her famous biscuits. But when she made her famous biscuits, and she made them on a baking sheet that was covered with aluminum foil, and then she'd drop the biscuits onto the aluminum foil, cook them, remove the biscuits, and then with the aluminum foil on top of the baking sheet, she'd take off the aluminum foil, brush off the crumbs, wash it in soap and water, allow it to dry, and reuse it. Now, why was she reusing the aluminum foil? Well, waste is a sin. We're a frugal family. We just don't waste, and it's perfectly usable again. Okay, so that's the story. But every newsletter is designed to sort of reinforce a family value. But in the case of that, every newsletter has a story, and every story has an activity to go with it that carries out the value that we're trying to teach. So the one that the treasure chest that I grabbed, it's inside it, there's always a gift, and it's often a costume of some sort. In this case, we're looking at, oh my, what's that? We're looking at a chef's apron, a chef's toque, and the kids get to wear these. There's a baggie. Do I mean baggie? There's a Ziploc bag that has the ingredients for Mommy Dew's biscuits. And they get to make the biscuits with their grown-up. And there's even the aluminum foil, which they get to spread over the baking sheet. And at the end of it, you go through what Mommy Perdue did is you scrape the crumbs off, you wash it and dry it and reuse it. And the idea is every activity is designed to last maybe an hour, where they talk with their grown-up about the family value that this newsletter was about. By the way,
love that.
Okay, I would like you to do me a favor and help me give a plug to the book on newsletters, How to Communicate Values to Your Children so they'll love it.
Okay, so this book, I have not dug into this whole book yet, but I know that you talk about the kits that you give out as the children's newsletter. And what's amazing is that if you are just talking to children, we all know that talking can go in one ear and out the other, or it can feel like, why are my parents droning on about this thing that doesn't seem to affect my life? And really our goal, though, is not just to say, here's my value, I want you to value my value. We want them to choose to value that thing. And so it can't just be mom and dad's values that I now see. It is, how do I get them to take on this value for themselves? And what you're doing is you're saying, I can do this in a very fun way, that they're learning something, not just about the family. You started the whole conversation today by saying it's about time together and knowing the family story. So you are helping the time together aspect happen through these kits. And you are also then saying, you're helping the children to know their family's story and their history. It is amazingly beautiful. And I know that you talk about that in your book, How to Communicate Values to Children.
You know, if it's a large family and it's geographically dispersed, which both the families that I'm associated with, you know, it's tricky to be able to instill the values when, you know, one's in Maine and one's in California. or Tokyo or wherever they are. But the feedback I get from these treasure chest gifts is that the kids just can't wait to open them. And, what kid does? It's a principle of persuasion that when you've done something nice for somebody, like giving them a costume, it makes them receptive. So here's an activity that they like that's timed with their grown up. And then another thing that kind of grew out of it is the parents would take pictures of the kids wearing the costumes and showing the biscuits. And then, they'd share it with each other. And that's kind of a cool thing too, because when there's a family reunion or a wedding or a whatever, the kids know each other. Mm-hmm. I had something neat the day that Frank and I married, and it's sort of trivial, but I still find it meaningful. We'd gotten married. It was a reception at the lawn of my house. There were 12 of Frank's grandchildren all playing on the lawn together. And I'm standing beside a woman who is saying, isn't it remarkable? All the cousins seem to know each other. And the reason I remember this one little vision of kids playing and knowing each other and having fun was I thought that's the most normal thing in the world, doesn't everybody? And she was telling me, no, the different branches of my family don't know each other and they don't know how to play together because they haven't spent time together. So I would like to influence families to spend time together where you can have fun together and you do know each other and you do know what's going on in each other's lives.
Mitzi, all this has been really, really positive, and I can see where people are going to really take these little tidbits and try to incorporate them. But let's talk really quickly about what happens when somebody in the family doesn't, grasp these values. And maybe you've lived a great life with both of your families, and they've always have. But it seems like there's always going to be an exception. And I know you already talked about how they you settle quarrels and things like that. But is there a time when you just have to basically say, okay, until you get these family values, you're not in the family anymore?
Well, I can speak to exactly that because there's a man whom I admire just so much. His name's Dennis Jaffe, and he's made it his life's work, 40 years that I know of, to study families. And he said that by 100 years, there's no such thing as a family that hasn't pruned one or more of its branches. Mm. And by pruning, that means either the branch just says, I can't stand you, I'm out of here. Or the family said, we can't stand you, you're out of here. So it does happen. However, it hasn't happened in either of the families that I'm part of. So I think I'm living proof that it doesn't have to be that way. By the way, I would adore to talk about the book that I've just finished.
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. So we have talked a little bit about the books that you currently have already published, and you have another one that you have just finished. And I don't know if you have a date for the release of that book, but I would love to share all about that. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Now, the book that I've just finished, I'm going to ask our listeners, and this is rhetorical because I can't hear your answer, but have you heard of Mark Victor Hansen, the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy? The Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yay! Please comment if you're listening live and you have heard. Go ahead.
Okay, this man has sold more books than anybody alive of nonfiction. He had a co-author, Jack Canfield, but between the two of them, they've sold 500 million books. I had the extraordinary privilege of being allowed to write his biography. And I just sent it to the publisher 3 days ago. And the publisher said, normally we take a year, not because it takes that long to put a book, to print it, but because we have, the book tours and the publicity and just all the stuff, there's a queue. So, but he said, I like this so much, I'm putting you at the front of the line. We're going to try to have it out in May.
Oh,
Woohoo!
wow. Wow, that's soon.
Yeah, it's exciting. And Mark Victor Hansen, who probably knows more about publishing than anybody else on the planet, well, he tells me something that I'm kind of scared to repeat because I'm scared of jinxing it, but here goes. He says it's a 3 million copy book.
Right.
And
That's amazing.
and what would make it a 3 million copy? By the way, the name of it is Mark Victor Hansen Relentless. And what makes it a 3 million copy book is it tells the story of the man behind this extraordinary success. But what I found most fascinating about it is he's had more failures than you can count, including bankruptcy, being suicidal, a failed marriage, but all the things that were just would be just catastrophic for most of us. They propelled him to even higher heights later. So he's a story of just endless persistence and courage and faith. And I end each chapter with comments that I think anybody who follows the things that you can learn from Mark Victor Hansen's life, you're going to be farther along the road to being all you can be. And if you do even one of them, you're ahead of the game. If you do 3 or 4, I predict success on a scale you haven't imagined.
That is fascinating. And, every time we did get 2 comments back. One thought the book was just by Jack Canfield, and another listener said yes, that they had heard of him. So thank you for sharing. And I'm excited about your book coming up. And it's amazing how congruent that is with any story that we've seen of somebody who is successful or has achieved some form of success, that there has been those valleys or dips or challenges, that it does seem that the greater the difficulty, the greater the opportunity, as Napoleon Hill would say.
Whom I love. Yeah,
Yes.
one just quick story. I don't think it's widely known, but Chicken Soup for the Soul was turned down by 144 publishers.
Oh, wow.
And there was almost universal agreement among all the publishers that the title was stupid. And other people said that it was just too nicey, and that nobody, just, as I said, they all turned it down. And yet that one book sold 15 million copies, and it started Chicken Soup for the Soul. Today, it's a franchise, and you can buy, my goodness, you can buy chicken soup, dog treats, shampoo. It's just, his one idea, his ability, his relentless ability to never give up, just resulted in something extraordinary.
Listening to you talk reminds me of, people talk about working on your business, not just in your business, but that a lot of business principles apply to family. And, you could be great at business. And then you were talking about at the very beginning, all these families who were, by your description, dysfunctional, yet, so yes, they were, or at least one generation of that family was wildly successful in business, but sometimes that doesn't translate to being successful in other areas of life. And the family takes, to have a successful family, you have to work on the family, not just in the family. And that reminds me of what some of the work that Rachel and I have been doing. And just in the last, year or so, we've done just a few things. Like we grew up in families that ate together, and we've done that with our children. But then we took it up a notch and got a little more intentional. And we took one day a week. We have this very special meal. We have our oldest daughter set up the table every one day a week. It's like having Thanksgiving every week. Now our 2-year-old woke up a couple weeks ago from a nap, and I got her, and she's like, is it, we call it, we do these Shabbat dinners. She's like, is it Shabbat? And she was so excited. And I was like, well, no, we got to wait a few more days for that. But things like that. And then we put our family values on a wall at the end of the table. And now our kids, or my oldest daughter, will repeat some of them to me. And so just little things like that you can be very intentional about. And it doesn't take hold immediately. It may take time, but the next generation, by you showing the enthusiasm for it, can pick that up.
Well, then how much time have we got? Quick story. This comes from a former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Joe Califano. he started a group called CASA, Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. And again, he's studying what's preventive for substance abuse. And he said parents would be absolutely astonished if they knew how deeply they affect their kids with their words. Like the kid can be saying, I hate you, I never want to see you again. But the kid will still, when he's older, act out what parents were teaching him or her. That you know, even when it's really going badly, they're still listening to you much more than you think they are.
That's profound, because if we take their words at face value in those moments and we respond to just those words and we step out of character, that's not going to lead them the direction that they need to go, which is us staying focused, committed, and living out our ideals and living out our value system in front of them. So that was very well said. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the family teams work. Jeremy Pryor, we just spoke with last week, and he's begun this group called Family Teams. And he was talking about the root of addiction is isolation and the need to have a culture and have people around you who believe in you. And that being one of the main reasons why family is so critical and important, and not just only the nuclear family, but the larger family, the generational family, the parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, and having that whole family come together. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm just so fascinated by the idea of how people, normal people who maybe don't have a tremendous, warm, supportive environment in their family. Maybe they have a few relationships that are good and some that are maybe a little bit broken. Maybe things aren't as good in your family as you would like them to be. How each one of us can take these steps towards strengthening what we provide, what we give to the next generation, but also how we grow those roots back, what I would call upstream, back towards the past generations, and pull in more of those stories and learn more about our history and value and honor and cherish what came before, even if there's always going to be pieces that maybe weren't ideal or picture perfect. But how can we celebrate the strengths so that we can create strength on both sides?
Yeah, and well, in the Henderson family, I'm pretty sure I can't recommend this to everybody else, but we have a tradition that that by the time you're 60, you're supposed to write your autobiography. And we have books. We've got shelves and shelves and shelves that go back to like the 1800s. And that those books, they tell, you know, the disasters, the triumphs, and it's just so good to know where you came from.
Can you briefly mention, I know we're at the top of the hour. We need to wrap up soon. We typically try to keep the podcast within an hour, but I would like to ask you this question. You mentioned at one point you reached out to family members and had them contribute their story to a book that then was a compilation of each person telling their experience of what they loved about the family. Can you share about that and how that became such a meaningful project?
We have the What It Means to Be Us book, and there are probably 70 entries into it. Everybody over age 12 is supposed to write a little essay. It can be 150 words, one wrote 1,000 words, of what does it mean to be us? And there's so many good things about it. But first of all, it gets everybody thinking about what does it mean to be us? But then on top of that, it's so cool for me in my 80s to read what a 12-year-old, what's on her little mind. I think she's really interested to hear what's on my mind. You get to know each other in a way that you didn't. And you get, I think just the act of putting it in writing and in a book, it's fabulous for strengthening the family. It's just a great identity thing. It's, you know, you're thinking about this all important question and not taking it for granted. What does it mean to be us?
Well, Mitzi, we need to wrap for now. I'm sure we would be able to have you back on in the future if you would be so inclined. But can you share with us, if somebody wants to get a hold of your books or hear more about you and your work that you're doing on anti-trafficking, or if they want to connect with you and have you speak for their event, how would they reach out to you?
Okay, I am at this moment working on creating a website for Relentless. they can get to me. Let's see, if they go to mitziperdue.com, you'll get to look for the contact us section. And if you write me, I'll write you back.
That's excellent. And that is mitziperdue.com.
Exactly. And I'd love to hear from people.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I would love to put a capstone on this conversation, but Bruce and Lucas, do you have anything else that you would like to share before I do?
I'm just grateful you came on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzi, for sharing your family values with us.
Well, I've loved being on to get together with you, and Rachel, thank you for so many questions. They were just what I love.
That's excellent. Mitzi, it's really amazing and unique to talk with somebody who is on this trajectory of not just saying, how can I do the best for myself and my family, but how can I help other people be exposed to these ideas and think differently about the resources available to me that maybe I wasn't or didn't have access to before. And so thank you for sharing these ideas. You've made us definitely expand our way of thinking and be able to do more with what we currently have. So thank you so much for being with us today.
I've loved every second of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And in closing, please remember, success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love.